Every writer knows that the best conversations about writing don't happen in classrooms or symposia or any fancy artisanal setting. They happen at the bar, usually after deadline. That's the vibe we're going for here. This is The Other 51, a podcast about writing with me, Brian Moritz. This week, I'm joined by Baxter Holmes, senior writer at ESPN. Baxter, before we get too deep into journalism stuff, I need to tell you something that we're friends on Instagram, and I need to go out to dinner with you, I think, or several meals or something like that. Your Instagram stories are like the best food stories I've ever seen anywhere. They are excellent.
Well, the people that I'm fortunate enough to be dining with are really the ones who make everything happen, and I connected with a lot of them through some of these stories. So all the credit goes to them. I'm just humbled to be at the table.
So I'm curious, before we get into it, and it kind of leads into one of the first stories that I want to get into today. How did you become kind of a foodie? Like, where did this come from? Just not journalistically, but just kind of in your own life. Where did that come from?
It's interesting, because I've had people ask me like, oh, you must have been into wine before you did the wine story. And like, I wasn't.
Really?
Or, oh, you must have been interested in food before you did some of these food stories. And I really wasn't.
Huh.
I just was looking for what I thought were good stories and tried to learn as much as I could about certain things to write well about them. But beyond that, I would say that I do have a respect, or I've developed an intense respect for the people on that side of the table who, it's not that dissimilar from storytelling in that they're spending an incredible amount of time trying to gather great ingredients, just as reporters do, trying to gather great information. And that's the assembling of that with precision, focus, and detail to make something special. And that's a lot of what we do. So there's a lot of parallels there. And so I have, as I said, I have an intense respect for them, the level they do it at, and what they're trying to achieve.
It's funny you mentioned that, 'cause I'm jumping the gun with my best thing that I've read lately here, but I recently read a book by Dan Charnas called Work Clean, The Life-Changing Power of Mise en Place to Organize Your Life, Work, and Mind. And it does a lot of that. It takes a lot of it like the first maybe 2/3 of the book talk about like mise en place and like the organization and basically what you were talking about, kind of like the craftsmanship and how a professional high-end kitchen runs and how incredibly organized and detailed they are and how, incredibly thoughtful they are about everything. And it kind of taking bits and pieces of that philosophy and how you can apply it to a non-kitchen environment. It was a really fascinating book. It was really kind of interesting. And the best part of it were, like you said, these stories about people who work on that side, work in kitchens and chefs, and just the level of detail and the level of attention that they pay to their craft and cooking. It's really fascinating to think about it kind of from that point of view.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's all these stories about writers who, they're obsessive and they drive themselves to the absolute brink to do this kind of work and all of this other stuff. And there's tons of stories about chefs who are the same way. I mean, I don't know if you're interested in the documentary series Chef's Table, I think on Netflix. Mm-hmm. And some of these chefs have, I think there was one, they've driven themselves almost, to madness with respect to their commitment to excellence or above and beyond and all that. So, and you don't have to look far in the history of literature to find a lot of writers who've done the same. So, yeah, there's a lot of links between a lot of things. And the book you mentioned sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think you dig it too. So, I wanted to have you back on it. We chatted about a little more than a year and a half ago about some of the work you've done, and I wanted to have you on because you had one heck of a month in terms of stories at ESPN earlier this year between the Greg Popovich story and the Lakers story. First of all, just congratulations. Those were two. I used both of those in my classes as examples of great writing. I mean, and to have them come out so close to each other, congratulations. That was really awesome to see.
Oh, thank you, man. I really appreciate that.
So, I mean, what was that as you were working on both of these stories? And I assume, you correct me if I'm wrong, we get into it, there was some kind of overlap in the reporting on it, just because they're so long and so kind of in detail. I'm assuming that there was some kind of time overlap. So what's it like balancing, if you were, two stories like that?
Yeah, they did overlap. First of all, the Lakers story I started on about a year ago,
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
then the Greg Popovich story actually began for me. I want to say in like November of 2017, in a way, in
Okay.
that I was gathering material for this story on wine in the NBA. But every time I would mention those two words, wine and NBA, people in food and wine would tell me some legend about Greg Popovich, and there were so many that I had to set them all aside because I just wanted to focus on the players. And then after that, after my wine story came out, the first one, I came back to the Greg Popovich one in whatever the spring of 2018. So um, yeah, so I was working on those in tandem, and they're very, very different stories, as
Hmm.
anyone who's taken the time to read either of them can tell. And so there's Google Docs for me, with where I'm putting a lot of my reporting. I'm trying to build certain scenes in both stories, gathering a lot of information, and it was interesting in that uh, some of the one of the stories is very much about an organization where people are not on the same page and there's dysfunction, what have you. People who
Hmm.
can read the Lakers story know what I'm talking about. The other story is very much about, in a way, togetherness and and how this coach who's in charge of this organization does that by bringing people together at the table. So it's about togetherness and showing care and showing love and communication and collaboration and whatnot. So the dichotomy of these stories was actually really interesting because at the end of the day, they're about two very simple things, and in one place it was happening, and in the other it wasn't. And
Right.
I'm not trying to say that these are the reasons why the Spurs and the Lakers are on different ends of it. I'm not trying to draw any like say this is be this happened and therefore this. I'm not trying to say any
Right.
of that. I'm just trying to say that during the reporting process, it was pretty striking to me how I would be on calls for one story, and then I would be on calls for another story later in the day, and those calls just couldn't have been more different. It was hard not to notice that the dichotomy between those two things.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because as I was rereading both of these this morning, and what struck me most, one of the things that struck me most about the Popovich story, and I'll have links to both of these stories in show notes as well, was that there you didn't really the in your writing on the Popovich story, you didn't make it prescriptive at all. You didn't kind of make you teased this out a little bit, but it was not the Spurs have been great for however many years because Popovich has these dinners and like that's the secret. Like if you want to be like the Spurs, just go out and have a lot of expensive wine and expensive dinners and it will work for you. And I thought that was an interesting choice that you made, that was not this prescriptive thing. It was very much a descriptive story.
Well, I'm just trying to do the show don't tell,
Hmm.
instance of it. And I had a lot of comments from people throughout the organization who'd been there, who described how these dinners, these experiences were the backbone of their dynasty, which on the surface, it's like, well, that kind of seems weird. You got these great players, and it's hard not to notice that being really central. But the people would say, no, 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 you need to think about it on a deeper level. Like, we could all go in different directions. We could all, it's especially on the road.
Hmm.
And Popovich certainly drives everybody really hard, but at the table, we all come together. We're human. We might not even talk about basketball at all. We get to know each other. Where you're from, what your family is like, all these different things over the experience of several hours, and nobody's just staring at their phone the whole time, and that brings people together in a way that is really unique. I think that would be true of any experience at the table with people, and uh, I think we look at the Spurs as being maybe the most close knit organization in sports over the last however many decades. But then, I mean, you could make the case of just them as a business. I mean, businesses have gone to San Antonio to study the Spurs, their chemistry, the communication, the collaboration, all this stuff, because they're kind of a marvel
Hmm.
in that way. And these dinners are a huge, huge part of it. So, yeah. So to your point, I mean, I wanted to lay some of these experiences out there and let people kind of decide or not decide, but just show them these experiences and what the people who said they're made, versus trying to, yeah, as you point out, like up at the top, say something like, even be blunt about it, as some people would say, like these dinners are the backbone of the Spurs' success, because I that puts too fine a point on it. I
Hmm.
don't. I think it's just better. I mean, in any instance, I guess, to show and not tell.
Yeah. What was the reporting process like for that story? I mean, you mentioned that you'd gotten a lot of kind of a lot of stories in the original wine story, but when you kind of decided to make a Popovich specific story, I mean, how did you go about reporting that specifically?
I went back to a lot of the people who I had talked to previously for the wine story, the NBA wine story, and they had described certain instances with Greg Popovich, and so it was like trying to, connect with them, like, describe it more vividly to me. What was it like in the room? How many people were at the table? What was the conversations like? And getting closer and closer to him. He doesn't do personal interviews. That's kind of a patent thing for him. So I wasn't able to speak to him, but I spoke to many people around him. And you're just trying to get, I think who is it? Maybe it's Robert Caro, but he would describe like these drawing concentric circles. So like if it's Lyndon Johnson who's at the center of it and then drawing a circle right outside of it are the people very next to him or right next to him, and the people a circle outside of that are the people next to them. So I'm just kind of working my way inwards closer and closer and closer, almost till I get to people who are like sitting right next to him through these experiences, to get an understanding of what the environment is like, what the attention to detail is like for him, how much he puts into it. The sense of balance, and that was something else that was kind of an aha moment for me during the reporting, was something his college coach told me, Greg Popovich's college coach, that he was saying that he is so glad that Pop found something else in life that that's outside of basketball, that he can attach so much of his kind of ferocious intellect and all of that to. Because if it was just basketball 24/7, he feared he'd kind of burn himself out. So he honestly thinks food and wine is in many ways a balance for Pop, which I absolutely believe in, or believe that it is. And beyond that, I think it's great for players and others around him to see another side of him. During practice and on the court and during games, he is as intense and as demanding as it gets. But if he was that way all the time, I don't know that people would be as responsive to it, whether it's his staffers or players. So the table is where people get to see a different side of him and where he gets to kind of balance out, the other side of himself.
It's interesting, that idea of the concentric circles from Caro that you mentioned, and it was noteworthy in this piece, and obviously this happened in the Lakers piece too, but in the Popovich piece that he didn't talk. And I wonder, because when I talk to students and I have them in class, I feel like that's always a hang up for new reporters or young reporters, like they can't get the person at the center of the story to talk. And I'm wondering your kind of ideas, strategy, your process when you're writing a story about ostensibly Greg Popovich when Popovich won't talk, and how that's him not talking to you is not really a deterrent to the story.
Yeah, well, look, some of the greatest stories in history are quote unquote write-arounds in that way, where the main character doesn't talk. And I'm quoting Patrick Radden Keefe of the New Yorker, who said something to the effect of, editors should assign them more, because we shouldn't just always be relying on the main person. We can tell that story through the people around them, through people who were in the room, through people who are intimately familiar with things. And one person saying no, I don't think should kill what is a good story, a good idea. And look, in terms of my process, I'm just trying to talk to as many people as I can on these bigger ideas as possible. So, if it's dozens and dozens and dozens of people over a long period of time, that's what I'm going to do. I love doing that anyway. I think I kind of look at, a lot of big stories as like you're just assembling puzzle pieces, and it's only maybe halfway through when you start to see what the clearer idea is or the clearer story. Like, this is a story about a very intense man's way of connecting with people, and how he's kind of used this timeless approach of bringing people together at the table, and that how important this is to the chemistry, the collaboration, the connectiveness that is the defining characteristic of this organization under him. So that, it takes me a while to get there, but I'm always just thinking like, I want to talk to everybody, every single person I can. And sometimes I'll go above and beyond, and, my editors will be like, you need to, I think I've heard this from a lot of my friends in the business who I truly, truly admire. They'll say things like, man, I will report up until my editors, until like 5 minutes before the deadline. I'm always trying to gather one more bit of information, talk to one more person. all of that. It's kind of obsessive in a way. And I certainly am. I have this fear, this almost crippling fear of missing something, or I didn't reach out to this person, or maybe there's one more bit of information over here. Have I turned up every rock possible that could be really revealing? And so I just go as hard as I can, as long as I can, until I basically can sleep at night again.
I wanted to peel that away a little bit, because that's certainly a familiar thing for a lot of writers, I think. But then how do you balance that with, oh crap, I've got to write about this now? Especially probably on a feature story where you're going to have deadlines, I'm sure, with your editors and with the publication. But it's not like a daily newspaper where like you have an 8 o'clock deadline and it doesn't matter how many people you have to call, you have an 8 o'clock deadline. How do you kind of balance out that wanting to make one more call when okay, now I've got to start writing? Or how do you're ready to start writing?
Yeah, what I've tried to do, I mean, this is something I probably struggle with, but one thing I've tried to do in recent years is to start writing scenes. So like if I have a particular, the dinners, are a good example. Like if I have a particular dinner scene, I may still be gathering other information for the story or trying to convince certain people to talk or whatever the case may be. But let's say I have, and there's certain scenes in that story that are good examples of this, but let's say I have enough there, I can start writing that scene, and then I can go back to the main person and maybe ask a few more questions and details, and then eventually it's like, all right, this is here, I can check this list off or check this one scene off. I don't want to get to the point, and I've done this in the past, and I absolutely do not recommend it for anybody. Don't get to the point where at the end of the day, all you have is a bunch of information and you feel like you're finished reporting and you start writing. It's really daunting. Okay. I think if you check little boxes along the way, like, all right, I'm going to write this scene, or, some people have word counts. I've heard of that, and I think that's an absolutely fine route. But I would recommend being incremental with it. And it helps a lot too in terms of managing when you have other big stories you're working on or other stories you're working on, and being able to hit deadlines. And maybe you can show your editors a particular scene, and that can be enticing to them. And they're like, hey, we want to know more about this or know about that. So I would recommend not saving it all to the end. That's for sure.
I have found that working for my own writing, for my own academic writing, when, you figure you can, like that idea, that one more study or this one more area to look into, and you kind of keep digging on that. And that is a really good way to stoke my procrastination. And I'm really, really good at that. But I find to be more productive, like when you said, you write 500 words, you write a little bit or a little portion of it. And then that can often, I found, you probably found this too, it can guide where you should be going next, or your next call, or your next vein of research, or where you should go next by actually doing it, rather than you're never going to get all the information. So it's kind of like a false flag to think you can.
Yeah, well, look, perfect can be the enemy of good, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't that how that phrase goes? So I think about that sometimes too. Like, you have to move, you have to keep it going. You have to keep forging ahead. You can't let this is something that I've struggled with at times. It's like, oh, just let me. Or I remember reading once. This probably hindered me in a way, but I remember reading once. Somebody said, "Oh, I don't begin writing until I finish absolutely all my reporting." And I was thinking, like, well, what if during the writing process it helps reveal certain things, maybe holes in the story that you didn't realize, or right. Or another avenue to go down, or a theme you didn't recognize, something like that. So. If only to save yourself a lot of work and heartache in the end. It's good to get some writing down. It does not have to be perfect. Right. It's just you're starting to build the bones of what the potential story could be, and it's good to have that framework for sure.
Did you have, or do you have, looking back at that Popovich story, a favorite scene, a favorite story that you heard?
Man, they were all pretty special to me. It was in and out, and I guess what we call an inline. I guess other people might call it a sidebar, that you could read on the desktop version. I don't know if it came up in the mobile version, but it involved this other guy named whose name is also Greg Popovich, and he is a winemaker in California and has been mistaken for Greg Popovich, the coach of the Spurs, for like the last 20 years in terms of when he makes reservations at hotels or restaurants. and what his life has been like. And that was a lot of fun in that somebody told me like, oh, there's another Greg Popovich out there. And I thought that's crazy. And lo and behold, this guy also works in wine. And when, I spoke to him over a period of months about these instances all throughout his life. And he didn't realize until he and I started talking about how much of this has happened. Because this is just the shadow he walks in.
Right.
He didn't realize, he's like, now that I think about it. I remember during one of our first phone calls, he said, now that I think about it, this has been happening to me constantly. Like, and he just, all the instances of like, the security guards at the gated community that he lives in that call him coach, or, the phone calls he gets from restaurants or hotels and they're confirming reservations or they're telling him welcome back when he's never been there before. All those instances. And, I remember, he would message me at times. It just happened again. He was at a restaurant in Beverly Hills, party of 6. He walks up and, he says, Popovich party of 6. And they think that Pop is coming in behind him. And he's like, no, it's just me. And he sees everybody's faces sink. They take him to the table. It's the best table in the house. There are people there waiting to greet him. And it's just how it is for him. So that was amazing. It speaks to the culinary legend of the Greg Popovich and how far it spread. But this guy could have been nicer. And so, he's a huge fan of Pop. I hope they get together one day to talk about wine and sports and politics and whatever else. But that was one that when I would tell people I was working on this story, that would be one of the nuggets I would share. So I was very fond of that one.
My favorite part of the story, I think, was the anonymous player who said, sometimes you just want to get Shake Shack and go back to your hotel room and not deal with this long meal. And as someone who, on a recent trip to New York, our meals were street fair tacos and Shake Shack, I could relate to him, I think. This is a great little throwaway line in there of how just kind of like, again, like you said, the other side of this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the meals aren't for everybody. These are long affairs. It's a lot of wine, a lot of food. The NBA season is really brutal in terms of travel and not getting much sleep. And I can totally understand if the guys are in one city and they're exhausted. It's been a long stretch of games and they just want to go back to their room and pass out. But it's their only night in that city, and Pop has been working on a reservation and a really special night at a restaurant for a while, and he's got a huge affair lined up. It's hard to say no to that. So I understand both sides of it.
So I want to talk a little bit about the behind the music Lakers story that came out. Again, wonderful piece. And you said you were working on that for about a year before that came out, and just kind of walk me through the process on that, because that was before they got LeBron a year ago when you started reporting on it. So kind of how did the story start to take shape for you?
Yeah. So after Sports Illustrated did an expose on the Dallas Mavericks and their culture and some really troubling things there, I got a heads up from some sources, I want to say, about it, them saying something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, if you want to take a look at a troubled culture, you should take a look at the Lakers. And this was maybe in February or March of a year ago, and I started making some calls and met with some people and wanted to understand kind of what things look like. And there was certainly plenty of material there. And as you mentioned, the team did not have LeBron yet, so it was a big summer. I stepped away from that story for a little bit. I had some other stories I needed to finish, and then some family health issues came up. So the summer was one where I was disconnected a little bit, and then in the fall I came back to it and started doing more substantial interviews, and then honestly, just a lot of things were happening with the team. I'm sure anybody who's even casually following the NBA saw all this spate of things, where there was Irvin Johnson's behind the door meeting with Luke Walton, and details about that getting out. There's the Anthony Davis trade talks and those falling apart, and the chemistry effect that had on the locker room. There was the team missing the playoffs in LeBron's first year, his injury. It was really just and then Irvin resigning, the team parting ways with Luke Walton, hiring Frank Vogel. There was one thing after another, so it was really a dizzying sequence of events that, in a lot of ways, feel only the Lakers could have this. It's like made for Hollywood in a way. but that was a little bit of the behind the scenes of how it started, and I guess, yeah, in terms of the timeline.
So how much of that kind of original reporting that you were doing a year ago when you just started looking at the culture, how much did that make it to the final story, or how much did it sounds like the events of what happened in the past year really kind of shifted the story a little bit, or
A
a
little
lot?
bit. I mean, the story eventually just kind of became about how the Lakers had changed in the wake of Rob Pelinka, their general manager, and Magic Johnson ascending to their posts, and everything that happened, and the various ways in which they changed in that time span. And look, there was a lot to fit under there.
Hmm.
So a lot of the things, so that was the general theme. I think how the story opened in some ways was, an early interaction with employees that I learned about. So it all, so there were things from the early bits of reporting, I would say, that still were there in terms of different themes or ideas. And, but again, the concept just of, this story is going to focus on these 2 years, and then, or the first 2 years of what it's been like. There's a lot that can go in there, and you're just trying to figure out, okay, what is necessary to tell this story? What had an impact? Not everything, there's a lot of things that happen, but not everything is going to resonate and be as telling as other things.
Hmm. And you were talking about your reporting on all of your stories. I'm wanting to talk to more and more people. I would imagine on a story like this, which is, a little more hard newsy than some of the other stories that you've worked on that we've talked about. How much do you feel a little bit more, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but responsibility? I don't even know if that's the right word. But to do that extra reporting, kind of given the context of the story and what's in there, kind of, it's going to be probably an explosive story. So the extra reporting is really important, I would imagine, in a story like this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I would say for me in general, it probably helps that I'm just wired to want to talk to everybody.
Hmm.
And in some ways, that's probably going to safeguard me, or safeguard the reporting in any story, not just me, but in any story where the information is maybe a little bit more sensitive and whatnot, because you're trying to be as representative as possible of what actually happened, of what it's like, or whatever. It can, whether that's the dining room where Greg Popovich is taking his team out, or a particular interaction with between Irvin Johnson and employees, whatever the case may be. You want to lay your head down at night knowing that the information is solid. And so in some ways, like, it's a good question. It's a fair question. In some ways, the way I'm wired, it didn't change a lot for me, because I'm just trying to talk to as many people as possible. And that is, I mean, even back when I was a beat reporter at the Boston Globe covering the Celtics, I would do that on off day features if it was trying to talk to a dozen people to get a sense of the, whatever player on the team. And it's the same case here. Now, this is just a longer story. It's a more ambitious story. So I maybe have more time or resources or whatever to get it right. But yeah, I'm aware also that it's a different natured story than some of the other ones that I'm working on. But in some ways, the checks and balances are they're similar. It's just like, how comfortable are we with this information? How much have we done to vet it and verify it? Talk to as many people as we can to make sure it's what we have is representative of a collective and not just a one person's perspective.
I'm wondering, what was it like the couple days after that story drops? And especially, as much as you're comfortable talking about with Magic going on the air on ESPN to talk about it a little time after that, but just in general, after this huge story drops and getting huge reaction across the sports world, kind of personally, what are those days like for you?
Oh, well, the day that it came out, it was exhausting. I mean, I think I was up doing television with ESPN, I think starting at 4 a.m. Pacific. So, and didn't sleep much the night before. I think I was on the phone with producers only a few hours before that. And so you get a quick nap, you get up, you're doing TV, and then I was at our LA, downtown Los Angeles studios for the rest of the day. I think starting at 7 a.m. and or maybe 8 a.m. and I was there till about that late at night. night, and it was every hour. It seemed like I was doing a different Sports Center hit or TV hit. I was doing, I don't know how many radio hits I did. For as many I did, I probably turned down as many just because there wasn't time. But almost every 15 minutes was doing a different one. Definitely during later in the day, fatigue started to set in a little bit, and I'm just subsisting on coffee and whatnot. And but it was how do I put this? I've been really, really fortunate, beyond fortunate, that some of the stories I've written over the years have had their brief moments in the spotlight where people are reading them or talking about them. And for as much effort as I try to put into all of these stories, that always means the world. And I try never to take that for granted. Having anyone devote their time and attention, especially in the age of dwindling attention spans, to an in-depth story means a lot. But this day that day that story came out was something that was quite different in terms of, hearing about it everywhere. It seemed like on every sports media platform, everybody's talking about that story. I haven't seen the final numbers. I'm sure it did pretty well online, but I hearing from a lot of people around the NBA, hearing from a lot of people who aren't in the NBA. And one of the interesting things I can share was, and this has actually continued, is getting messages from people who have told me, I worked I'm paraphrasing, but them saying something along the lines of, I worked in a workplace like that. I worked under managers that were like that. And I can't tell you, how much I appreciate you bringing to light kind of what it's like for employees to be in environments like that, because people don't understand unless they're there. They don't know what it's like to walk into an office place where those kinds of things exist. And I didn't anticipate those messages, from people in a variety of fields when I was working on the story. But at the end of the day, that is what it's about. It's any workplace is just a bunch of walls, and the people inside are going to shape what that place is like. And so I heard from a variety of people after that. And then, this is kind of a rambling answer, but those days were a blur. I don't know how long it took me to kind of catch up on my sleep, but it's been pretty busy afterwards. I could say that too.
It's funny. Last week I had Tyler Dunn from Bleacher Report on, and we talked about his big story about the Packers that came out in March or April, and kind of similar to the Lakers, the dysfunction and what went wrong on there. And I was joking with him, and I wanted to ask you too. Like, it almost feels like we're in this golden age of behind the scenes of dysfunctional team stories, where you get your piece on the Lakers, you get Tyler's on the Packers, you get the piece on the Mavericks, like you mentioned in Sports Illustrated last year. These incredibly well-reported, well-detailed stories about behind the scenes. I'm wondering what you think is kind of driving that.
That's a good question. I haven't thought about it. I think there may have been a time where we were just focused on everything that was happening on the court or on the field or on the pitch. And I think now we're looking more, again, I could be totally wrong about all of this, so I guess I'll couch it with that. But I think we're looking more at organizational health, and just not like, oh, why are the Knicks bad? Or, oh, why are the Lakers bad? Or, oh, why are the Clippers bad? And it's more, we need to look at the top. We need to look at the top of the organization. Who owns it? Who's in charge? What kind of decisions do they make? How has this impacted it? Because I think at times it's too easy to say like, well, they have bad players and that's it. But in a lot of businesses, you look at who's in charge, and I think we're looking. Maybe we're taking a harder look at that. I could be wrong. And then I'm trying to think. This is something else I think of, and again, I could be totally wrong here. I think that in journalism in general, I could be wrong, but it feels like there's a lot of instances where we're taking a look at organizations as well. I've seen different stories about, what the workplace is like at Amazon, what it's like at Facebook, what it's like at Google, these various companies. So maybe it's just a journalism trend in general. I don't know. I'm curious for your thoughts on this.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of more looking kind of at a macro level, not just the micro level. I do think, this has been kind of one of the good side effects of the proliferation of online journalism sites and long form writing online, where you have, at ESPN.com, you have the space and the time and the ability to put together a long story like this, where even like an LA Times might not have the resources to do so because they time, space, whatever. Bleacher Report exists solely online, and so you have both the space to do the stories, but also kind of the need to fill that space with new stuff. And I think that's, I don't know, I'm kind of, as you said, I might be wrong, I'm kind of pulling that off the top of my head, but I just feel like there's more journalistic space to fill, and these stories are incredibly interesting, even if you're not a fan of the Lakers or of the Packers or of whatever team is talking dysfunction, because you are looking at bigger issues of organizational health and what's wrong and why isn't this bad, and there's just the dramatic aspect to it too. So I think that there's something to that as well.
That makes sense. I could see that.
All right. So I gave you my best thing that I've read at the top of the hour, so you can give it to me now. What's the best thing that you've read lately?
Oh, man. Oh, you know what? All right. So, lately, it was the New York Times Magazine feature, The Day the Music Burned.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've read that one.
Yep.
I think it might have been a cover story. And I think that is such a journalistic triumph in so many ways. But one of the most important ones is getting to the bottom of a story that was not only incredibly important, but that was essentially covered up.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much effort put into spin, misinformation, whatnot, about what is truly a tragedy in the arts. And reading that story, I had seen it commented on online about what a gut punch of a read it is, and it's, may leave you in tears and all of this. And I read that story and walked around feeling so hollow for a while, and I struggled to even talk about it with my wife, who sings, and that's been a big part of her life and her career. So talking to her about losing these masters in this fire was really devastating. But I marveled at that story, at the detail, at the effort that the reporter put in. I can't imagine everything that went into that, all the trying to sort truth from a lie or spin, whatever you want to call it. And it's an incredibly important story. So, I've read a lot of, I try to read as much as I can in between everything else. But that story is one that'll stay with me for a while. So anyways, definitely that one.
Yeah, you're right. That was a gut punch of a story. And just the breadth and the amount of music lost in that is just, it is. If you are at all, and it's the wide range of music that was stunning too. This is not just old masters from, the 30s, 40s, and 50s. This is like the entire history of popular music as we know it basically disappearing in that fire. It's staggering. And the reporting on that
there's a paragraph, not to cut you off, but there's a paragraph in the story where I think they list, it's a long one. It might be a single continuous sentence where they list, among the dozens of artists, they list people, and it's, I don't know how long this sentence is, this paragraph is. It goes on for a long time. And it's basically every bold-faced name that you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And when you're going through that, and it's like all these masters are gone of all these legends, like the people that made music great, it doesn't matter whether you, a parallel for this would be like, what if the Louvre burned down? Mm-hmm. Or what if, MoMA burned down, or the Art Institute of Chicago burned down, and we lost all this irreplaceable, priceless landmark art. You read through this story, The Day the Music Burned, you get that paragraph, which is somewhere fairly high up. It's a long story. And I remember just reading that, and it was like all the air left the room, and I'm just trying to imagine, like, my God. And so the character also, again, I'm going too long on this, but the character also who I guess he was kind of in charge of the vault. He no longer works there where a lot of these masters were stored. But his grief was conveyed in a very visceral, real way, and you could feel what he felt about this tragedy that is hard to even put into context or words. And so, I thought that story was a triumph. It's one, I don't know that I've read anything better this year, and whatever comes next, it'll be tough. But I know there will be. There's so many amazing writers. There's so much amazing work coming out every day, every week. It's hard to keep up with everything.
Excellent. Well, Baxter, as always, this was a pleasure, and I hope we can do it again soon sometime.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
As always, thanks for listening to The Other 51. You can find show notes for this episode and all our episodes at sportsmediaguy.com on the Other 51 tab. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I can highly recommend Overcast for this. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.